The stars over Tanith Prime burned with a quiet indifference, distant and cold, as the last remnants of humanity's fleet prepared for what they all knew would be their final stand. There was no time left for strategy, no room for retreat, only the grim certainty that beyond this battle lay either survival or extinction. The Xel'Karn Empire had crushed every world in its path, relentless in its hunger to erase all that was not its own. Humanity had been just another obstacle, another insignificant species to be subjugated or wiped away. But what the Xel'Karn never expected, what no one in the galaxy had seen coming, was that humanity would refuse to kneel. The war had not begun with grand speeches or declarations. It had started in the shadows, with distant colonies going silent, trade routes collapsing, and distress signals vanishing into the void. By the time the Terran High Command realized what was happening, the Xel'Karn had already swept through a dozen star systems, reducing entire planets to cinders. Their war doctrine was one of overwhelming force, crushing their enemies before resistance could take shape. Against lesser civilizations, it had worked flawlessly. But humanity? Humanity had spent centuries fighting against impossible odds against nature, against itself, against every force that had tried to keep it caged. And now, against the Xel'Karn, it would not go quietly. The last great fleet floated in the dark like wounded predators, scarred but still dangerous. Carriers, destroyers, and repurposed civilian ships carried the last soldiers of a dying race, every weapon system charged to its limit. They were outnumbered 100-1, facing an enemy that had never known defeat. But it wasn't numbers that defined humanity. It wasn't even technology. It was the sheer, unrelenting will to fight, to adapt, to endure, to turn even the darkest moments into a reason to push forward. And the Xel'Karn had made a mistake. They thought this was just another conquest, another inevitable victory in their unbroken chain of domination. They had underestimated how far humans were willing to go when pushed to the edge, what desperation could forge in the crucible of survival. As the first enemy warships appeared on the horizon of the battlefield, the silence before the storm stretched thin, electric with the weight of the moment. 1,000 stories converged in that instant, pilots gripping their controls with white-knuckle determination, gunners locking onto targets that outmatched them in every way, engineers working furiously to keep failing systems running for just a little longer. And deep within the command ship, a single order waited to be spoken, the words that would unleash humanity's last, desperate defiance against an empire that believed it had already won. The countdown began. The final battle had arrived. And somewhere in the void between the stars, fate itself seemed to pause, waiting to see whether humanity's fire would flicker out or burn brighter than ever before. A slow pulse of red lighting flickered through the corridors of the command ship, casting long shadows over the faces of those inside. Every crew member had the same look, focused, exhausted, but unwilling to break. They had come too far for that. Across the bridge, hushed voices whispered final calculations, confirming what they already knew. The odds hadn't changed. They were still impossibly outnumbered. But somewhere in the back of their minds, a quiet defiance burned. Humanity had never been the strongest, nor the most advanced. But survival had always been written into their bones, etched into the very fabric of what they were. And if this was to be their last battle, then they would make sure history remembered it. Beyond the reinforced viewports, the Xel'Karn fleet advanced in perfect formation, their warships vast and gleaming, each movement a demonstration of their empire's supremacy. Unlike the human fleet patched together from scavenged wrecks, stolen enemy technology, and whatever could still fly, the Xel'Karn moved with calculated precision. They were a machine of war, honed over millennia, with a single purpose: to dominate. Yet, for all their tactical perfection, there was one thing their empire had never accounted for: the unpredictability of humans. In the lower decks of the flagship, engineers worked with quiet urgency, modifying torpedoes that weren't designed to do what they were about to attempt. There were no guarantees this would work. In theory, it was madness. But at this point, madness was their only advantage. Elsewhere, a squad of soldiers loaded onto boarding craft, their mission clear: get inside one of the Xel'Karn command vessels, disrupt their systems, and give the fleet even the smallest window to strike. Meanwhile, deep within the Xel'Karn fleet, Supreme Warbringer Kelvas observed the battlefield from his towering command throne. The human resistance had lasted longer than he had anticipated, but he was not concerned. Their struggle, while impressive, was ultimately futile. The Empire's fleets had crushed species far greater, civilizations that had ruled entire sectors before vanishing under the weight of Xel'Karn conquest. He had seen the pattern 1,000 times. First, defiance. Then, desperation. And finally, the collapse. Humanity had simply taken longer to reach the final stage. But he would make sure they understood resistance was not just pointless. It was suicidal. Yet, despite his certainty, something gnawed at him. He had studied human warfare, their chaotic, improvisational tactics that seemed to defy logic. Other commanders had dismissed them as primitive, disorganized. But Kelvas had learned to respect one truth about humanity. They were at their most dangerous when they had nothing left to lose. And right now, this fleet, the last of their kind, had nothing left but a burning need to fight. A signal flared across the battlefield. The Xel'Karn had grown tired of waiting. Their warships surged forward, weapons charging, ready to deliver the final blow. Alarms shrieked through the human fleet as targeting systems locked onto them, the incoming storm of firepower promising to end it all. And yet, even as death closed in, a voice crackled through the human comms, steady, unwavering. The order had been given. The trap was about to spring, and the Xel'Karn had no idea what was coming. The first wave of Xel'Karn firepower ignited the void, lances of searing energy carving through the dark like blades through flesh. Explosions rippled through the outer ranks of the human fleet, tearing through armor, sending shattered vessels spinning into the abyss. But the formation didn't scatter. It didn't break. Instead, the surviving ships accelerated forward, straight into the storm, as if defying logic itself. Kelvas watched from his command throne, his mandibles tightening. This was not the panicked retreat he had expected. Human war doctrine had always been a strange, unpredictable thing. But this was madness. They should have been falling back, should have been scrambling to preserve what little they had left. Instead, they were charging into annihilation with the kind of recklessness that defied every tactical calculation. And then the first detonation ripped through his fleet. It wasn't a standard torpedo or a desperate volley of railgun fire. It was something far more insidious. A human vessel, barely holding itself together, had drifted too close to one of his cruisers. And then, in the blink of an eye, it erupted in a violent cascade of electromagnetic energy. The shockwaves surged through Xel'Karn systems, scrambling targeting arrays, frying communication relays, throwing entire squadrons into chaos. Before his technicians could react, another explosion followed. Then another. Human ships, some operational, some already reduced to burning wreckage, had turned themselves into devastating EMP bombs, designed to disrupt the Xel'Karn fleet's perfect, machine-like coordination. Kelvas' second-in-command turned in alarm, his voice a sharp hiss. Their attack patterns, this was planned. And he was right. The chaos was not random. The human fleet, though battered, had used itself as bait. Now, amid the confusion, fighter squadrons wove between crippled capital ships, boarding pods launched at impossible speeds, and battleships that should have been running were instead firing with relentless precision at the Empire's weakened formations. On the human flagship, the bridge was alive with movement. Officers shouted coordinates, targeting solutions adjusted by the second. Every moment was borrowed time, but it was enough. A single crack in the Xel'Karn's unshakable superiority, that was all they had needed. And while the enemy struggled to recover, another mission was unfolding in the dark. A covert strike team moving through the wreckage of the battlefield and repurposed enemy shuttles had just breached the hull of the Xel'Karn command ship. Their mission wasn't survival. It was sabotage. And deep within the corridors of the Empire's most powerful warship, a lone detonator was armed, the timer counting down. The Xel'Karn had come expecting a slaughter. But humanity had given them something else entirely. And for the first time in the history of their conquests, the Empire's war machine was on the verge of breaking. The command deck of the Xel'Karn warship trembled under the force of distant explosions. Kelvas rose from his throne, his claws tightening around the edges of his control panel. This was wrong. This was impossible. The battle had been predetermined. Humanity was meant to crumble beneath the might of the Empire. And yet his fleet was in disarray, their perfect formations shattered by a species that should not have had the power to stand against them. A warning blared through the ship, flashing glyphs translating the unthinkable intruders aboard. His mandibles clicked in frustration. How? The Empire had fought hundreds of wars, conquered entire civilizations without effort, and never once had an enemy dared to bring the fight onto his own vessel. Yet somewhere in the corridors of his flagship, humans were moving unseen, placing charges, sabotaging critical systems. In the chaos of the battle, the human fleet pressed forward, their desperate assault now turning into something more momentum. A single Xel'Karn dreadnought, its systems fried by electromagnetic pulses, drifted helplessly before a wave of missile fire struck its core. The explosion rippled outward, igniting fuel lines, sending debris crashing into nearby ships. One mistaken formation became a chain reaction, and suddenly the battlefield was turning into a graveyard. Deep within the Xel'Karn command ship, the human strike team pushed forward, their weapons whispering in short, controlled bursts as they carved a path through the alien corridors. The mission had changed. Initially, they had planned to disable the ship, to cripple it long enough for their fleet to escape. But now they had an opportunity to do something far greater. The detonator was set, the countdown ticking away. They had seconds before the ship's reactor would become a fireball large enough to take half the enemy fleet with it. But before they could retreat, a door hissed open ahead of them, revealing the towering figure of Kelvas himself. The Supreme Warbringer was not running. He was not hiding. He stood in their path, weapon drawn, his gaze burning with fury and something else, something they had never seen in a Xel'Karn commander before. Fear. For the first time in their history, the Empire's greatest warrior was staring at an enemy that had done the impossible. Kelvas took a step forward, mandibles clicking, as if trying to understand the force that had undone everything he had built. "You should not have made it this far," he growled, his voice carrying the weight of an empire that had never lost. The team leader, breathing hard, raised his rifle but didn't fire. And yet, here we are. The final seconds on the detonator ticked down. The human fleet, battered but standing, turned away from the chaos, engines burning as they fled the impending destruction. The last of their torpedoes fired in unison, covering their retreat, ensuring the Empire would never forget this day. And then, in the heart of the Xel'Karn flagship, the detonator's light blinked once. A moment later, the void erupted in fire. The Warbringer's ship, the symbol of the Empire's dominance, was consumed in an explosion so vast it shattered the Xel'Karn's morale in an instant. What had once been an inevitable victory was now something else entirely defeat. Scattered, broken, and without leadership, the once invincible fleet turned tail, abandoning the battlefield, their formations dissolving as panic overtook them. Humanity had not just survived. It had won. In the aftermath, the stars bore witness to the impossible. Against all odds, against an enemy that had never been defeated, the last remnants of Earth's warriors had done more than endure. They had changed the course of history. The Xel'Karn would remember this day not as another conquest, but as the day their empire learned the price of underestimating humanity. And as the survivors drifted through the wreckage of a war they were never meant to win, one thought remained, echoing through the darkness.